to learn more. And today we have with us Yann Brandt. He is the Executive Vice President of Development for Demeter Power. Yann is one of the modern solar industry's pioneers. He's an expert in both power purchase agreements and PACE financing programs, and this will be the topic of today's presentation. And you might also know Yann as the editor and publisher of his daily solar energy news brief. That's SolarWakeup.com. And if you're not currently subscribed for that, I would encourage all of you to go and subscribe today. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Yann. So Yann, you can begin.
Thank you very much, Rick, and thank you to the Principal Solar Institute and the sponsors for hosting us today. It's a pleasure to be here with you and the attendees. Today we wanted to give a little bit of an overview of what I like to call the next evolution of distributed generation and solar finance, with the merger of PPAs and the new up-and-coming commercial PACE markets. To give you a little bit of background about what we do and how we're relevant to the sector, we formed a company called Demeter Power, and we essentially develop, fund, and operate solar energy and other distributed generation assets within PACE markets. We work with contractors and developers throughout the industry to develop distributed generation assets targeted primarily to small, medium, and enterprise commercial buildings that are non-municipal and non-residential. Our team is very diverse with various solar and legal backgrounds. It gives us a good footprint in the ability to put together the sort of legal structures that will innovate the solar industry, once again, much like the solar service agreements and the PPAs have done a little under a decade ago. Our financing products are called PACE 3P, third-party PACE, and we help commercial buildings demeter from the grid. So to give you a little bit of background about why we chose the space and why we chose to create this product, we look at California as an example with the most solar installed on a national level. We look at where the energy is used, which is the chart on your left, versus where solar is built in the same categories. So we've seen a large upswing in the amount of solar that's been created. Solar has been built on the residential side, and we know a lot of solar has been built on large commercial, Fortune 500 municipal type industrial and large commercial buildings. When you look at and compare the solar being built versus where the energy is produced, there's an inverse relationship. While the small to medium commercial sectors use the most electricity, almost 50%, it has one of the lowest adoption rates in terms of solar capacity in the market. And we want to analyze why that's happening in order to get an idea why PACE 3P is relevant. So when we compare the residential development and residential adoption of solar energy, we see that 70% of all solar on the residential side is third party. Hence, you've seen the growth of companies like SolarCity, Sunrun, Sungevity, and others. Customers have really been drawn to having a third-party ownership product in order to put solar on their home. When you compare to commercial setting, only about a third of all solar in a commercial setting is third-party owned. The other is direct ownership, and even some of the third-party owned would be classified as an operating lease, which is still credit back and essentially just a transaction to monetize the tax benefits. So the market disparity is that residential and the government sector has a very firm basis to assess credit risk and create an underwriting scenario for the investors to be able to invest in the solar project. Obviously, from a residential setting, we have the FICO score, so we can easily assess within minutes if a customer is able to get credit and not. And And the same on the municipal rating. You can look up a bond rating within minutes and know and assess what the risk of a solar project might be. In the commercial segment, there is no current uniform method to assess or mitigate the risk of a customer. And I want to be specific that it's about assessing and mitigating the risk of the off-taker and the customer, not of the overall project. There are scenarios where an off-taker might not need to be financially creditworthy in order to make a project work at some level. With SREC auctions or other utility incentives, sometimes the projects could pencil even in the default scenario, which is obviously not a sustainable way that the solar industry will come into the commercial market. So that is the main focus of our product, is to create a uniform method to assess and or mitigate the risk of a commercial solar project and a commercial solar project off-taker. So our product is PACE 3P, third-party ownership of distributed generation systems, where we collect our revenue in the form of a property tax assessment. I elaborate on solar and call out all distributed generation systems because we open the door for including non-solar technologies in the overall project. Our primary focus in deploying to market is solar, and that is, for purposes of this webinar, the main focus. But PACE does open the door for many other technologies to be included, efficiency, storage, et cetera, that we'll get into a little bit deeper. So merging PACE and third-party ownership does have some deviation from the typical power purchase agreement. Those deviations result in the creation of two products that are similar to what we see in the industry today while having its own unique tweaks. The PACE lease is an annual fixed payment with unlimited upside as utility rates rise for the off-taker and the building that the system is housed on, whereas a PACE shared savings contract is more similar to a power purchase agreement that is contractually based on a similar base energy rate like a PPA, and that has some upside benefits for both parties as well as some downside protection for the off-taker. So what is PACE? We've heard a lot about PACE in the news. We see it more and more. At the very high level, and it's important to note that the PACE that we're talking about, Property Assessed Clean Energy, differs from PACE, the policy that is that we hear a lot about on the residential side, with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac through the FHFA, where there is a deadlock. There are lawsuits from municipalities and states to open up FHFA prohibition of, or the FHFA threat against lenders that are dealing in PACE districts. We are only focused on commercial PACE, which does not have an FHFA contact and does not have similar prohibitions. So it's important to note that while residential PACE has been significantly withdrawn from where it had been a few years ago, commercial PACE is on a dramatic upswing, and more states and counties are getting into commercial PACE markets. So the PACE eligibility begins when a state regulates and allows for local municipalities to create a PACE jurisdiction. Essentially what the local jurisdiction is doing is allowing special financing or special taxing districts to be created for the purpose of property assessed clean energy. This is very similar to the very old policies that funded some of the first fire departments and fire assessment districts. And many of you that currently pay property taxes still pay those same fire assessment fees in the non-ad valorem property tax. A good way to track where those policies are and where they're going is to go to the PACE nonprofit, which is called PACE Now. Their website is pacenow.org. They do a really good job of tracking where the policies are and where they're going. So there are several service provider segments within the PACE market, and I want to point out where the financing products sit with regard to other segments. Once a state has opted into creating a state legislation that allows for PACE districts to be created, administrators come in or are newly formed in order to create a local PACE market. Those PACE administrators act as on behalf of the quasi-governmental agency to approve and assess the PACE assessments, as well as do the ongoing collection and disbursements of those assessments. They act in a similar way to a local municipal utility might or a local fire district. The second service provider segment that is quite prevalent is debt aggregation. The debt aggregation, there are several companies that have been formed within PACE markets to buy the debt on these projects. Their goal is to buy as many of the PACE projects and buy the debt from those projects, and to aggregate them and in some form resell them or profit from a potential interest rate spread to a larger bank or investment group that is interested in a secure form of revenue that is PACE debt. So the banks and investors typically come in and buy entire portfolios versus doing individual projects. A PACE PPA combination, and which is more relevant to contractors, et cetera, that are doing more than just debt on projects, is where Demeter Power would sit. So while not competing with debt aggregation or investors, companies like ours would come in and create a service product that leverages the capital as well as the policies of the entire PACE market. So all the different pieces have to be in place for a financial product to be created and implemented in a given scenario. So it's important to note the difference and to understand the difference when someone says, I work in PACE, which market segment they're actually involved in. So how does PACE 3P work? One of the benefits is that we have very predetermined geographic boundaries. We know which PACE markets we can operate in and which PACE markets allow us to work within them. There are two types of PACE markets, open markets as well as closed markets. Closed markets require that all of the capital in that, for any project in that market, come from a single source, and typically the administrator also acts as a debt aggregator, which does not allow for any other type of capital, other type meaning tax equity or other equity or other debt to come into that market. It only comes from a single source. PACE 3P, by targeting these micro markets, it allows us to be a little bit more efficient and also create standard financial products for those markets. So within a given utility, within a given PACE market, we can create a repeatable, uniform financial offering, which is probably the largest benefit of PACE besides the credit security, is that contractors, developers will be able to look at almost every commercial building within a given geography and sell the same product over and over again without having to do extensive analysis and spend many hours and many days in an office trying to figure out what am I going to sell them. So we fund our projects with private capital, much like other solar service providers do today. In many ways, we are a commercial version of the residential solar financing products that are currently in the marketplace, with the obvious tweak of adding PACE to our credit security. In a PACE PPA scenario and a PACE 3P scenario, the solar asset is managed by a third party, and the revenue is collected through the property tax assessment. So instead of the off-taker paying directly to the solar provider, they are going to pay the amount that they agree to on the property tax bill for terms up to 20 years. The property tax collector collects that revenue, gives it to the PACE administrator, who then disperses it according to the guidelines that were signed up in the upfront. And that is the credit security that allows for PACE lease and PACE shared savings to work in a repeatable, uniform fashion. So what is the biggest difference in PACE 3P versus where a traditional PPA or lease might be today? And this is really the largest innovation that helps create the financial product that will bring commercial solar to the next step. Whereas a solar PPA or a lease today, as many of you know, credit is based on an individual customer. So we look at, if it is a Fortune 500 company, what is its bond rating, what are its financials if they're public. If it's a private company, we look at private P&L statements, financial statements, and do an underwriting on the corporation itself. The building owner and the building ownership is then also transacted in a very specific, unique transaction, which increases the transaction costs on every single deal. One of the biggest sticking points of traditional solar PPAs is the change of ownership. What happens if a corporation wants to sell a building? What happens to the next property owner? And many PPA projects currently require that property owners get the approval of the solar provider prior to selling the building to make sure that the next owner of the property is as creditworthy as the current contract, which obviously creates a major sticking point. With PACE 3P, the transaction is more focused on the building as opposed to the corporation that is the off-taker. So the building becomes the off-taker on its own, with obviously the corporation reaping, or the business that's inside the building reaping the benefits of the solar asset. So the credit is based on the property, and the things that you look at is, have they been current on their mortgage, have they been current on their property taxes, and what is the property worth from a property tax appraiser standpoint. The standardization and streamlines the underwriting, and the credit runs with the property automatically assigned upon change of ownership, which removes one of the major sticking points of a traditional PPA. And finally, you can finance any building integrated technology as it's approved by the state PACE policies or the local PACE policies. To give you an example, in Florida, the PACE policy actually allows for hurricane mitigation to also be included in PACE, and each state has adopted some tweaks on the technologies that are allowed. So as I mentioned, the off-taker pays by paying an additional line item on their property tax bill. It's called a non-ad valorem property tax assessment. It's typically listed at the bottom of your property tax bill, and most buildings already have some non-ad valorem property tax assessments on their bill. It is the portion of the bill that is the total tax as opposed to a percentage or millage-based tax, which is the ad valorem tax. So fire assessments, neighborhood improvements, mosquito districts, neighborhood improvements like sewer connections, et cetera, are currently listed in non-ad valorem taxes with the addition of PACE charges today. So really, in essence, property assessed clean energy uses a very old financing method to pay for clean energy improvements on a building-by-building perspective. There is no neighborhood or municipal-wide subsidy of an individual project. Each project is paid for by the individual buildings and its improvements, and is transferred in that property for the period of the assessment without ever impacting the other participants in the market. It's also important to note that none of the in most places where administrators create a PACE market, municipalities typically have little to no impact to their own administration or financials. Typically, all of the capital comes from private revenue, private capital, private investors, and does not leverage municipal bonds or municipal bond ratings. Only allows for the special financing districts within its jurisdiction. Where and what can we currently finance? We're most active in California with some focus on Connecticut. Connecticut has a statewide PACE program, whereas California also has a statewide program that has been opted in by over 200 cities and counties around the state. About 2/3 of California residents currently have access to commercial PACE. And the relevant programs in California are obviously San Francisco and LA with their own programs, as well as California First, which is the largest program probably in the country at this point. And then you have small PACE markets that are happening in individual places around the country, in Michigan, in Missouri, Florida, Washington, D.C., and many other places where local administrators are starting to create these markets. Most notably is one of the states that has currently just adopted PACE to show how bipartisan this actually is. While California has gone the farthest with local markets, the state of Texas just passed a statewide policy and that was signed into law by Governor Perry. We're hoping and look forward to having local PACE administrators create local markets in order to operate there as well. So technologies, as I mentioned, solar, battery storage, fuel cells, cogeneration, efficiency, and most other clean energy projects can be financed, bundled into a single project, and put together in a PACE-3P scenario of some form. Our current focus is California and Connecticut, but we will evaluate projects in other areas with PACE markets and really rely on local contractors and developers to learn more about PACE and to track it locally in order to put projects together. So we work in a way that allows us to leverage technology and essentially create a financing product that is repeatable and efficient for all parties involved. We don't want anyone to have to wait for us and vice versa. So we have an online system that allows contractors to register with the company as well as to put in projects that allow us to go through a project, go through the information, and quickly be able to respond. So we have a contractor package that has sales collateral and backup information on the relevant PACE market that you're operating in. Also training on how to effectively sell PACE-3P because it is a new concept, and then development and contract support from the Demeter team. The path to a term sheet is to start with the project registration, which is goes through our online system. Some of the highlights that drive the value proposition or the cost of a project from a PACE-3P scenario are obviously system size, EPC costs, production yield, but we also need information that's typically not really looked at in a solar project. We need information on who the mortgage holder is, who's got the senior lien on the project with that bank, or who's that bank, what is the total amount of that mortgage still outstanding, and what is the current property tax appraised value, not the assessed value, but the appraised value of that property. And that information is typically found online. Most tax appraisers currently have, most property appraisers currently have that information online. And then the address of the property will allow you as well as us to look at the property tax data and determine its eligibility based on geography. So one thing that's important to note when selling a financial product as opposed to a technology is you're really selling the financial model. In a scenario like PACE-3P or a combination of a PACE and a PPA, it's important to note what the value proposition is to the customer. What type of savings are they expecting? What kind of savings can be offered? what is the impact of any utility rate changes like time of use, where we're seeing a shift from non-time of use to a more complicated rate structure that most customers actually don't understand. And then what is the motivation of the customer? Is this an investment? Is this a net operating income transaction? Are they trying to create stability in their overhead costs? All of those things are important driver to making sure that you're giving them something that they want and that they will understand. So within those two structures, PACE lease and PACE shared savings, the distinction typically falls within two categories. PACE lease works well with smaller usage customers that are trying to fix their overhead and the overhead costs of electricity. PACE shared savings works really well in landlord-tenant scenarios with CAM charges. It also works well with high users or peaking users that are looking to integrate things like storage or fuel cells, et cetera, into a project in addition to a solar project. We refrain from putting term sheets together until we really understand what it is that your customer wants. And we want the people that we're working with, the contractors that are developing these projects, to really drive that point home to their customers in order to sell more effectively. Because with an effective financing product, you want to get to the point where you can effectively sell as well. So our value proposition is as follows. Obviously, from a financing standpoint, credit is the number one thing that we can offer. It is the driving force of creating scale in commercial solar in the commercial solar market. By financing the building and not the corporate or personal guarantees, we know that within a PACE market that almost all projects can be done from a credit standpoint. Can they be done from a value proposition? That depends. But the credit is something that is going to be uniform and repetitive within a PACE market. We don't have to have the awkward conversation with the corporation and ask them for their financial statements. The most awkward part of the conversation is to understand who the mortgage holder is and how much is left outstanding. Most of that information is public anyway because it's recorded with the county. And then from a contracting standpoint, development standpoint, you get to sell a single financial product that not only creates backlog for your organization, it obviously increases the profits and lowers the cost of operations, but also allows you to create expansion plans that are more based on what your backlog is as opposed to what kind of utility incentives or what kind of local incentives may or may not be coming. From a development standpoint, you know exactly within a geography what you can create. If you're not in a PACE market, then you know you can't offer a PACE repeat product, which creates a scenario where you're in a position to say no effectively to projects, which is not always a great thing, but it helps from a sales standpoint to not have to chase ghosts, something that we're all too familiar with in the solar industry. There are little to no contract negotiations that stand in the way of development. Contracts are pretty much standard and uniform for every project. So as you're developing projects, you can show your customers, here's the financing agreement, you can move forward. So what do we need from you as you're going through the process of developing PACE to repeat projects? Commercial solar gets sold on the value proposition. PPAs got sold on the value proposition. This is not something that's new to us than what was happening in the PPA scenario. We're just bringing that same concept down to a much smaller scale where we're looking at projects much smaller than a typical PPA project. Understand and sell within a geographic market. It doesn't help any of us if we're chasing projects that isn't in a PACE market until that local jurisdiction creates it. We're happy to give you the tools to educate your municipality. If you think there's a project that's live for you, we're happy to guide you in the right point and put you in touch with the right people to create a local PACE market if you have a project. But we don't sell within a market that doesn't currently have PACE. And then know the details of your current market utility rate and the tariff schedules. Are they shifting? Are they moving to a new class? how much option R is left in Southern Cal Edison, and what is the difference, how much demand charge does your customer have versus energy charge. We want to make sure that we're seen and our partners are seen as knowledgeable as well as honest as to what value of energy is going to be offset for the solar project. And that is obviously an important concept. I think with that, we'd love to have your questions and let Rick moderate that. My contact information is below. I really appreciate your time, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me personally, or we can be reached through the website on the project as well as contractor registration. Look forward to interacting with you through this as well as other methods. Rick?
All right, great. Thanks, Yann, very much. And I'm calling in today from Dallas, Texas. So we're here in Texas where we've heard a lot about PACE, but it's great to see how this would actually be implemented once these programs get in place. So again, for the attendees, please chat in the lower right corner of your viewer window. And you can send it to all participants if you want to share your question with the entire audience, or you can send it to all panelists if you have a private question for us. So Yann, the first question was from Richard. Where do you see the first PACE programs being established in Texas, and which cities or counties, if you have an opinion on that?
Well, I hope to see it in many cities and counties. I have not personally heard of any markets being created yet, local PACE markets. I hope it happens soon, but I have not personally heard it, or I haven't. It hasn't been that long. I think the governor signed it in June, sometime late June. So, give it some time, but I'm sure that there are some folks already working on it.
Yeah, and I would guess it'll probably be San Antonio or Austin would be my guesses, since they seem to be the cities that are most solar friendly in the state, but we will see. The next question was, if my local area doesn't have PACE established yet, should I wait before I try to take advantage of this, or what could I do in the meantime?
There are two trains of thought on that question. If your state already has a state policy, and another city if another city in the state has already adopted a PACE market, then I would work in a transparent way with the customer and give them an idea of what's available, because it's a lot. What's happening now is a lot of cities and counties are hesitant to create a PACE market until they know a project is coming. And that, so a good example is Edina, Minnesota. While Edina, someone actually created a project and then brought the project to the city and said, we'd like a PACE market. The city said, oh, that's great. We'd love to help you create jobs and create this project. We'll do a PACE market. And a similar thing has been done in Michigan as well as Ohio. Some cities are hesitant to move forward without a project, while some would move forward without a project. The difficulty is you never know how long it takes a municipality to do anything. A good example is my county, where I live in Florida. We've been talking about PACE for 2 years, and we have arguably some of the smartest people with regard to PACE. We have half a dozen of folks in the county that are extremely well versed on PACE, and my county hasn't been able to get their act together. So, I think without damaging the project or damaging relationships with a customer, you kind of have to understand what the political climate is with regard to getting a PACE project done. If you don't have a state policy, then I would definitely not start pursuing a project until the state has at least done something.
All right. We had several questions related to similar areas. The first question was, can you finance 100% of most solar projects via PACE? Then there was also, do you need state incentives for a Connecticut solar project to work? So if you could talk a little bit about how much of the project you can finance via PACE and where you can finance most of it via PACE.
Yeah, so from a capital perspective, PACE 2P is a third-party ownership, so we finance the entire project. You know, from a debt perspective, if you're doing a self-ownership scenario with PACE debt, that's a different question. It's better suited for debt aggregators. But from our perspective, we fund 100% of the project. Our limitation might be system size versus property appraised value, but that is on an individual basis that we have to look at. With regard to Connecticut, it brings up an important point. PACE 3P solves some issues on the financing part, primarily on the credit aspect. So we can do the smaller projects, you know, on the small to medium ZREC side, but we still need, because of the energy value, the value proposition does not change dramatically. The financial model is the financial model. You know, if solar costs X dollars per watt and each watt is going to produce X cents per year, you still need a certain amount of revenue to make it make financial sense. So in Connecticut, unfortunately, you still need the ZREC contract. That being said, it's more effectively used by, you know, and the projects can be more aggressive on the ZREC side. And secondly, you can do third-party owned projects in a non-municipal scenario, which has obviously been a big back and forth in the industry in Connecticut between some of the municipal organizations trying to aggregate all of the municipal projects and leaving only the private projects for developers, which have been tougher to get third-party financing around. But you still need some sort of ZREC contract in Connecticut because of the energy cost there.
All right, next question from James. Are you working with a group called Keeping Pace in Texas, which is developing a PACE toolkit for use in Texas, and it was instrumental in getting the legislation passed?
So we did work with Keeping Pace in Texas as they were putting together the legislation as well as pushing it through the House and the Senate there. So we are familiar with them. I have not heard that they were developing a toolkit in Texas, and I'm really glad to hear that. You know, uniformity around PACE is such a benefit. So if all the markets are created in a similar fashion, then absolutely, you know, we would encourage everyone that has local municipal contacts to push that toolkit out and get that done. We're a big fan of what Keeping Pace in Texas is doing. You know, they wrote the policy right. They allowed for third-party ownership within the PACE legislation. So we're able to operate in the state of Texas as soon as the PACE markets are created. So we're really happy about that.
Excellent. Next question from John. By using private capital, are you able to fund larger projects than what the building value would typically allow, which is around 10 to 20% of the building value in California? And if so, what additional credit requirements are needed?
You know, it's a good point. And John brings up the property tax, the caps that some states have created. So some states have guidelines to what maximum value of the assessment to property value might be, versus some states do not have those guidelines, and some have hard caps. So typically the caps are based on the total amount of debt that's placed on the project. So we're, you know, from that perspective, yes, because not all of our capital comes from debt. So we are able to create larger projects. But also from a fundamental financing standpoint, those caps are generated primarily for a scenario where those projects actually don't have an ROI or don't have a positive bottom line. So in a PACE 2P scenario, many times those caps, not many times, but sometimes those caps aren't relevant to us because the customer has immediate savings. So even though there is an assessment and our personal underwriting looks at the property appraised value, we look at that appraised value as, you know, from a default standpoint, you know, how much property tax outstanding might be there. You know, and obviously with the size of the mortgage is an important aspect. So between our underwriting, the PACE administrator's underwriting and approval of the assessment, as well as the mortgage holder approving the assessment, there are several eyes that are looking at this, in addition to the debt provider that's going to look at how that cap might be relevant to them.
Great. Next question was from Alex. Are you comfortable with the New Jersey SREC market to provide a PPA through PACE as long as the equity in the building is sufficient to cover the project cost?
Thank you, Alex, for that question. You know, New Jersey is an interesting place. They now have a statewide SREC PACE policy. I don't believe there's any active PACE market that has been generated. So from that standpoint, you know, we're definitely not an SREC aggregator or would take any SREC risk. I think the farthest that we would go into the SREC or subsidy market would be in a scenario like Connecticut with a utility-backed credit. So from a contractor standpoint, I would say if you have projects with SRECs or SREC strips, is figure out how to monetize those prior to and looking at those on an overall project basis. Really our goal, and it's going to be harder to do in northern climates. You know, our goal is to be completely post-subsidy on a state level. So in California, most of our projects are completely past CSI, and you know, we actually don't take the CSI. If there is availability for CSI, we pass that on to the building owner and let them take it. You know, until, you know, obviously our standpoint, we still monetize the federal tax incentives, so we're not 100% post-subsidy. But we hope to get there soon in northern climates, both New Jersey and Connecticut. New York is going to probably be one of the top states once they really adopt PACE because of their high energy rates. So they might not need the additionality of an SREC value.
All right. Next question was, what happens if a tenant leaves and the building becomes vacant and the electricity usage plummets?
Well, that is the risk assessment that the property owner has, right? So PACE and PACE works with a financing agreement for the property owner. So typically someone always owns the property, and typically there's a requirement that utility service remains intact. Our contracts, our financing agreement require it anyway. But the risk to the property owner is that the tenant leaves, and therefore there's an overproduction of energy in the building. The idea is that, you know, either they're renegotiating the lease if it has a short-term termination or a potential risk of default for the tenant, or also the property owner believes, and it's, you know, many appraisers and property owners will say that a solar-powered property is more rentable than others. So there's a give and take. There's definitely a downside risk with overproduction, you know, and having to sell that in energy at avoided cost versus providing a savings mechanism to the tenant. You know, so that is something that we educate our customers on and make sure that the property owner understands. But it does not impact our financing because our financing is with the property.
So just to be clear, so that risk is something the property owner faces. The financer will still get paid out of the assessment in that case.
Yeah, the assessment is backed by the property.
Okay. The next question was, do you see any pushback from utilities on your PACE programs or PACE in general? No, I don't. I mean, you know, not in a specific standpoint. I would guess that it would track some of the similar fights that are going on a national level with regards to net metering and things of that nature. Obviously, in Connecticut, things like the ZREC contract, or, you know, with Southern Cal Edison, an additional allocation of option R. You know,
from our standpoint, we're just providing another financing method for solar. Utilities type or utilities problems from a regulatory standpoint typically track post-regulate, kind of post the financing, and just in solar in general. That being said, one topic that I speak about often is the risk of the utilities run with pushing too hard on net metering is beginning the process where building owners, and I'm not saying this is going to happen immediately or even in the short term, but building owners get so aggravated with the monopoly of the utility that they choose the potential of just powering themselves. They can put a solar asset, a battery storage, and a fuel cell and get themselves off the grid. And if there's a financial product and a financial proposition that gets them to that point, that would be a lot more harmful to utilities than learning to get along with distributed generation. So creating PACE PP definitely creates a financing method to allow a property to demeter from the grid. Whether the adoption of that happens anytime soon is my guess is no better than anyone else's, but that is the potential for pushback.
All right, next question is from John. Could this or how would this work on a utility scale project?
So typically it would not work on a utility scale project. PACE is meant for building integrated and has to be a permanent fixture on a building. There are legal limitations to how far this could work. To the point, if you have a large campus and you wanted to do a ground-mounted system that powered a building, I'm sure there are legal ways of getting to that. Carports definitely work, but from a pure play utility scale model, it would typically not be allowed.
All right. Next question was from James. Does the project developer have to get project approval from existing mortgage holders? Does this cause problems very often, and are you able to help with this?
So the answer is most of the time, yes. Not all PACE markets require what we call lender consent. So typically, the mortgage holder has to. Sometimes the mortgage holder has to approve a PACE assessment to be placed on the property ahead of its mortgage because property taxes are ahead of it. The lender consent is something that we work very closely with the banks on. If you go to PACE Now's website, they actually created educational tools for banks to learn more about this. Some of the major banks that we work with are comfortable with our approach, are comfortable with the fact that it actually places the property owner in better financial position by giving them energy savings as well as energy cost stability. So we have really good luck in getting this approved and have really good relationships with major banks to get lender consent on our projects. We do take that and typically work with with the bank directly to get the project approved through lender consent. And we actually have ways of helping if a property lender does not want to give lender consent. We do have loan originators and intermediaries that help us refinance the property with a lender that will give us lender consent once the loan has been transitioned to a new property, to a new bank. So we do have several ways of dealing with this, the lender consent, if it becomes an issue.
Okay, next question from Mike. What's the minimum solar size for a commercial project in Connecticut, and I guess maybe also add the maximum size?
So maximum size is based on property value. So if you have a property that's worth $200 million, you have a very large potential solar project. So I can't give you the maximum size. It's really based on property value as well as energy usage, space constraints, etc. Our typical solar size, I'm going to give you some ranges here, but our limitations on size typically has to do with aggregation potential of similar projects, and that is primarily based around the tax equity market constraints. So in Connecticut, we expect to roll out a program where we're going to try to aggregate small, not small, but medium to large small ZREC projects. So call it 75 to 125 kilowatt small ZREC projects, and aggregate sufficient number of them in order to create a financing methodology for that space. We would really like to help that space get a third-party owned system in place. And so that's from a small scale. In California, we typically say 100 to 200 kilowatts should be the minimum, and we'll aggregate those in an overall California project pool in order to make those work as well. You know, as we ramp up and finance more of these projects, then we might re-look at this and try to get to a smaller commercial scale, assuming the installed prices are still within range of reason compared to the larger projects. In Connecticut, I haven't looked at the LREC values recently, but believe that ZREC is still the most efficient way to go. But it would depend on the combined value of the sort of PPA rate as well as the LREC value. Combine those two and look at how the project economics would work based on the install price.
All right. And in Connecticut, do you need the ZREC or LREC awards for the project to work? What if you don't have those?
Yeah, you still need the combined value of one of the other in order to make it work. You know, like I said before, PACE primarily solves a credit issue. We create some ability and to create efficiency around the financial model, but the relationship between revenue and install price still exists, so it's still a limitation that requires us to have the ZREC or LREC contracts in Connecticut.
Great. Next question was, do you include the cost of energy storage in your projects, and what would be the requirements around including energy storage with solar?
We can. So we work closely with several demand reduction or storage companies, intelligent storage companies. We work closely with them. Typically, in order for us to ascertain what the potential savings amount is and what the cost of the system is, would be looking at the interval data of the building and to really understand what it is, how they're using their electricity. So time of use is much more important for storage than it is for solar. So it's, I would definitely recommend if a project has the potential of doing, a demand reduction potential, refrigerated warehouse or large usage during peak demand times, you really want to look at the bills for demand costs and see when they're using it. But then is to go to the utility and request the interval data, and then we can, in a matter of 5 to 10 days, depending on how busy the analysts are, put together an idea of what value of savings might be created for storage, and then include it in a PACE BP offering.
Okay. Can you fund CHP projects?
Most PACE markets do allow us to do CHP and get the terms pretty much close to 20 years. So CHP projects we look at a little bit different because we're not as comfortable with the technology, but we work closely with some CHP investors and providers. We definitely don't take any gas cost risks. It is a little bit more intricate, but we're definitely looking at that market and trying to get closer and closer to offering a true service agreement contract. And we actually work with a few manufacturers to try to figure that out. How do we create a financial product around the technology to create a true service product, which is, essentially building owners, they like the utility because they get electricity when they want it, and they get to buy it as a service. They don't have to manage a power plant. And, we're trying to get as close to emulating that as possible using PACE BP.
Great. And for the audience, CHP stood for Combined Heat and Power, or Cogeneration Projects. The next question was from Kevin. He wants to know if he can see and get a sample financing proposal for customers. And maybe, Yann, that might lead to that slide you had about how somebody could talk to Demeter.
Sure. So the easiest way to start the dialogue for that is to register with us and do the proverbial NDA and get to the point where we can share that information with a potential partner. So we'd like to understand, where you're operating, what kind of projects, et cetera, and really, make sure that we can help each other move forward and develop projects.
All right. If there are any other last-minute questions, we just have a couple of minutes left. You can chat those in the lower right corner. Otherwise, I'll just, again, thank Yann for this great information. We hear so much about PACE, and it makes a lot of sense at the theoretical level. It's great to see how it actually works in practice and how it's allowing solar panels to get onto the roofs. We also thank Demeter Power for sponsoring today and giving us Yann, and the Principal Solar Institute, again, as today's host. And with that, Yann, if you have any parting comments, we'll wrap things up.
No, thank you very much, Rick, as well as the Principal Solar Institute, Principal Solar, for the great work you do and hosting us. Okay,
and there is time for one more question to come in, so I'll take that since we had a few minutes left from Arthur. Is there an interest rate that can be used for analysis?
It's hard. You can't really put an interest rate on what we do because it involves so many different types of capital and types of equity that goes into a project. PACE debt on a very high level typically tracks, based on size, somewhere between 300 and 500 basis points above the equivalent treasury bond. So that gives you an idea of what's going on in the PACE market. There's still a risk factor associated with it, but it is a lot cheaper than typical project debt for a solar project.
All right, and there was a question from Mike. Do you have any details on the Connecticut ZREC and LREC auction process with cutoff dates? I guess I could put the link out to the Desire database.
Yeah, I don't have it offhand. The medium to large, I know just passed. The small should be happening somewhere in December, January sometime, and then the next medium and large have not been announced.
And I'll chat that link. And we'll take one more question from James. Do some states limit project size to not more than the energy used by the building? And does this eliminate use for shared or solar garden projects?
I think PACE by itself limits shared or solar garden projects to the extent that it's not relevant to a single building. So you could have a shared or solar garden project within a campus of multiple offices, but PACE is based on a single property folio number as recorded by the property appraiser. So that would be the limitation, I think, because PACE is particular to a specific building. That limitation would be there.
All right, that's all the time we have for today, and the link to Yann's email is there on your screen, and also the link to his website. If you have any other questions, you can contact us via